The first maps were not drawn on parchment, but worn into the earth by countless footsteps. Long before satellites or even accurate charts, 25 ancient trade networks formed Europe's first information highways. By the end of this journey, you will see the medieval world not as a dark age of isolation, but as a brilliantly connected continent humming with exchanged ideas. How did a piece of amber from the Baltic Sea carry new gods to the Mediterranean? What secret intelligence did Venetian merchants hide in their ledgers that changed the course of history? These hidden channels moved more than silk and spice. They transmitted the very blueprints of civilization, from legal codes to architectural wonders, acting as a kind of medieval internet. Their story reveals that human connection has always been the real engine of progress. What forgotten pathway in your own region might still hold echoes of these ancient conversations? The true value of a trade route is measured not in coins but in conversations. To understand these ancient information highways, we must look beyond the physical cargo. A simple path becomes a superhighway when it carries more than just objects. It carries change. Think of a merchant caravan not as a line of pack animals, but as a moving university. Alongside bolts of cloth and sacks of grain travel new words, unfamiliar stories, sketches of foreign building techniques, and whispers of different stars in the sky. This is the crucial distinction. The goods are the surface traffic, the obvious exchange, but flowing silently alongside them is the real cargo, ideas. This deeper current is what reshapes worlds. For a network to earn the title of an information highway, it needs three key qualities. First, sustained contact. A single, chance meeting in a market square is a spark, but a highway requires a constant, reliable flow, a path worn so deep by repetition that communication becomes routine. Second, cultural permeability. The people using the route must be open to exchange, not just of goods but of customs. They listen, they adapt, they bring home not just a souvenir but a new way of thinking. And third, the transmission of transformative innovations. The ideas that travel must be powerful enough to alter the societies that receive them. A new farming tool that doubles a harvest, a spiritual concept that reorders a community's values, a mathematical symbol that unlocks engineering marvels. These are the signals that traveled the ancient wires. With this framework in mind, the map of medieval Europe transforms. We are no longer just looking for roads that moved salt or amber. We are searching for the channels through which the Renaissance was whispered, long before it was shouted. We are ready to walk those roads. That warm, golden piece of amber held a secret deeper than its beauty. For the trader who carried it south from the Baltic coast, it was a key, a passport into worlds he could scarcely describe. This was the beginning of the Amber Road, Northern Europe's first great information highway, a network so ancient it predates Rome itself. For thousands of years, this golden artery pulsed with life, connecting the pine forests of Scandinavia to the marble forums of the Mediterranean. Think of it not as a single road, but as a shifting web of river passages, forest trails, and mountain passes, all converging on a single, irresistible treasure. But the amber itself was merely the invitation. What traveled with it changed continents. When a Roman artisan paid a high price for that raw Baltic gold, he was not just buying jewelry. He was engaging in a silent dialogue. In exchange, knowledge flowed back north. Techniques for working metals, secrets of Roman iron and bronze, began to travel up those same trails. A Germanic smith might learn new methods simply by observing the tools used by the southern merchants who came to trade. This was a two-way street of innovation, where the commodity opened the door for the real exchange of skill. Historian John Haywood called amber the oil of the ancient world. and its routes became veins through which the lifeblood of northern culture flowed south. And it was not just technology that made the journey. Artistic styles, the shapes of brooches and the patterns on pottery, began to echo each other across vast distances. Even practices for honoring the departed, the ways communities memorialized their loved ones, show subtle influences that traveled this golden road. A single luxury item became a courier for an entire cultural package, proving that the first messages sent down these ancient wires were written not in words, but in style, technique, and belief. The Amber Road set the template, showing how desire for a beautiful object could weave a continent together, long before empires ever drew their borders. While Amber opened a dialogue of beauty, other roads were built for power. A single highway, known as the King's Road or Via Regia, became the central nervous system of medieval Europe, a protected corridor stretching from the bustling cities of the Rhine all the way to the distant gates of Kiev. This was not a hidden path but the main street of a continent, officially sanctioned and guarded by imperial decree. Its primary purpose was control, to move armies and solidify the authority of the Holy Roman Emperor. Yet, in a beautiful twist of historical irony, this road of power became the greatest avenue for public mobility the medieval world had ever seen. Imagine the constant flow along this route. Here marched devout pilgrims, their eyes set on the distant shrine of Santiago de Compostela, their hearts full of faith. Here traveled knights and nobles, their banners fluttering, bound for distant conflicts or crucial diplomatic meetings. And endlessly, in both directions, rolled the wagons of merchants, carrying precious Flemish woolen cloth eastward and returning with furs, wax, and silver from the Slavic lands. This incredible mix of humanity, all sharing the same well-trodden stones, turned the Via Regia into a living stream of information. The most visible proof of this exchange is written not in parchment, but in stone. Look at the great cathedrals that began to rise in German and Polish cities during this period. Their defining feature is a revolutionary style of architecture, one characterized by soaring vaults, immense stained glass windows, and delicate stone tracery that seems to defy gravity. This was the Gothic style, born in the farmlands of northern France. So how did it leap hundreds of miles into the heart of Central Europe? The answer traveled on the King's Road. Master masons, the rock stars of medieval engineering, would journey with their teams along this secure route, carrying not just their tools but their precious design books, folded parchments filled with complex geometric patterns. They moved from one great building project to the next, from Cologne to Prague, spreading a visual language of faith and ambition. The cathedral itself became a broadcast tower, its new silhouette against the sky announcing the arrival of a transformative idea, all because a safe road allowed experts and their knowledge to circulate freely. But the highway carried more than architectural plans. It also became the primary network for news. Royal decrees, papal announcements, and reports of distant events needed to travel faster than a merchant's wagon. This need gave rise to organized messenger systems, often operated by monastic orders or the emperor's own officials. These couriers would ride in relays, stopping at designated inns and monastic houses that dotted the route. Think of these way stations not as simple taverns, but as medieval routers. At each stop, information could be received, copied, and then sent out again in a new direction. A piece of political news from Frankfurt could be heard in Leipzig days later, shaping local decisions and market prices. This constant, reliable flow of official and unofficial updates helped bind the fragmented territories of the empire into a somewhat cohesive whole, proving that a road built for control could, in the end, become a powerful tool for connection. The King's Road demonstrated that when movement is protected, the most valuable thing that moves is knowledge itself, changing landscapes and minds with every passing cart and rider. A monopoly requires more than just control. It demands a common language, While kings built roads for armies, a league of merchants in the north built something far more enduring, a commercial internet. This was the Hanseatic League, a sprawling alliance of guilds and port cities that did not conquer territory with swords, but with ledgers and shipping contracts. For over 3 centuries, this network held a near-total monopoly over trade in the Baltic and North Seas, from the Russian forests of Novgorod to the bustling wharves of London. But its true power lay not in the cargo holds, but in the systems it created. The League understood that for trade to flow smoothly across different kingdoms and languages, you needed universal rules. So they established their own. They standardized weights and measures, so a pound of wax in Riga meant the same as a pound of wax in Bruges. They developed a common maritime legal code to settle disputes between merchants quickly, without getting tangled in local courts. This created a trusted, predictable environment where business could thrive, a framework so effective it became the operating system for Northern European commerce. You can still see the physical signature of this network in the red brick cathedrals and warehouses that dominate cities like Lübeck and Tallinn. This brick Gothic style is more than an aesthetic choice, it is a corporate logo in architecture. Using locally abundant brick instead of stone, Hanseatic towns built structures that proclaimed their wealth, their connection to the League, and their shared identity. It was a visual language of power and belonging, broadcast in clay and mortar. The nerve centers of this system were the contour, their fortified trading posts. Think of a contour not as a simple shop, but as a medieval data center. In places like the Steelyard in London or the Peterhof in Novgorod, German merchants lived under their own laws, worshipped in their own chapels, and maintained vast archives of market prices, debt records, and shipping schedules. These outposts were networked nodes, constantly communicating by letter and by ship. A report of a herring glut in Scania would ripple through the network, affecting salt prices in Poland and barrel prices in Bergen. They exchanged legal precedents, shared innovations in ship design like the robust cog vessel, and circulated news of political instability that could affect trade routes. This constant flow of commercial intelligence gave the League a decisive advantage, allowing it to negotiate as a single bloc with kings and princes. Perhaps the League's most profound legacy was linguistic. To facilitate all this communication, a common tongue emerged, Middle Low German. It became the lingua franca of trade from the Netherlands to Russia, the medieval equivalent of English in today's global business. Contracts, correspondence, and account books were written in this language, creating a unified information sphere that transcended political borders. The Hanseatic League proved that economic cooperation could weave a region together more tightly than any royal decree, building a world where information was the most carefully guarded commodity of all. But the Hanseatic League's ledger books were not the only place where worlds collided. Far to the south, where Europe's coastline met the vastness of Asia, stood a city that was the ultimate medieval data port. Constantinople was not merely a stop on the Silk Road, it was the grand terminal, the final interface where East met West. For centuries, its massive walls and golden-domed churches guarded the primary gateway through which the luxuries and learning of Asia flowed into a hungry Europe. Within its bustling markets, the scent of Eastern spices mingled with the sound of a dozen languages, a constant hum of negotiation between Byzantine officials, Arab traders, Venetian merchants, and travelers from the distant Mongol steppes. This was where the abstract concept of the Silk Road became a tangible, overwhelming reality. Yet the real story of these European termini is not found in the bales of silk, but in the quiet exchanges that happened alongside them. While a merchant from Genoa bargained for precious pepper, he might also acquire something far more valuable, a handwritten copy of a medical treatise by the Persian scholar Avicenna. In the same cargo hold that carried fine Chinese porcelain, sailors might transport detailed astronomical charts from Samarkand, mapping stars unknown to European scholars. The ports of the Black Sea, like Kaffa and Tonna, operated as crucial relay stations in this system, controlled at times by Italian merchant republics like Genoa and Venice. These outposts were fortified islands of European commerce on the edge of the Mongol world. Here, a unique and volatile cultural mixing occurred. A Russian fur trader, a Mongol administrator, and a Genoese bookkeeper would have to find common ground, leading to extraordinary transfers of practical knowledge. Mongol techniques for long-distance communication and administration subtly influenced European logistics. More profoundly, the very geography in the European mind expanded. As merchants returned with first-hand accounts of the immense, orderly realms of the East, the old medieval maps, often centered on Jerusalem, began to look embarrassingly small and wrong. This corrected worldview was a direct data download from the Silk Road's endpoints. Of course, this connectedness had a profound and tragic duality. The same ships and caravans that carried books and spices also carried unseen passengers. In the 1300s, it was through these very Black Sea ports that a devastating illness entered the European network, a pandemic that would reshape society. This event, while a tragedy of immense scale, underscores a brutal truth about these information highways. They were utterly neutral. They carried every kind of signal, the brilliant and the destructive, with equal efficiency. The knowledge that filtered through Constantinople and its sister ports, however, planted irreversible seeds. The recovered texts of ancient Greek philosophers, preserved and expanded upon by Arab scholars, began to trickle back into Europe. New mathematical concepts, including the numeral system we use today, and advanced navigational ideas started to circulate. This slow, steady infusion of alien knowledge challenged old certainties and created a fertile ground for questioning. The intellectual awakening we call the Renaissance did not spring from a vacuum. It was, in many ways, the long-delayed processing of information that had been piling up at Europe's eastern door for centuries. The bustling wharves of Kaffa and the grand forums of Constantinople were more than markets. They were the loading docks where the medieval world received the software update that would eventually reboot its future. The golden flow of knowledge was not confined to Europe's eastern gateways. Far to the south, across the shimmering heat of the Mediterranean, lay a barrier so immense it seemed designed to separate worlds, the Sahara Desert. Yet here, in this ocean of sand and stone, human ingenuity carved one of history's most demanding information highways. This was the Trans-Saharan trade, a network where the currency of ideas was as vital as the gold and salt carried on the backs of thousands of camels. For centuries, these caravans, some with thousands of animals, moved along established routes between the great West African empires like Ghana and Mali and the bustling ports of North Africa. The physical exchange was stark and essential: southern gold for northern salt, a mineral so precious in the Sahel it could be traded weight for weight. But the caravans were never just moving commodities. They were mobile universities traversing an empty sea. Alongside the gold bars and salt slabs traveled scholars, holy men, and bound manuscripts, turning the desert into a data stream. The ultimate destination for much of this intellectual cargo was a city that became synonymous with remote wisdom, Timbuktu. Its legendary status was not born from myth, but from the countless manuscripts that arrived there. Because of the trade routes, Timbuktu grew into a radiant center of Islamic scholarship, its libraries and universities brimming with tens of thousands of hand-copied works. These were not simple religious texts, but sophisticated treatises on astronomy, mathematics, law, medicine, and philosophy, many produced by African scholars writing in elegant Arabic script. The city's Sankore University attracted students from across the continent, creating a vibrant academic community whose influence rippled outward. This constant flow of books and thinkers did something profound. It seamlessly integrated the kingdoms of sub-Saharan Africa into the vast intellectual network of the Islamic world. Ideas from Baghdad and Cairo were studied and debated under the West African sun, while African scholarship and legal interpretations contributed back to the wider conversation. This connection had a second, ripple effect that eventually reached Europe. As North African ports like Tunis and Ceuta traded with Italian merchants, reports of the immense wealth and sophistication of the African interior began to filter into European courts. The tales of Mansa Musa, the Emperor of Mali, whose pilgrimage to Mecca in the 1300s famously distributed so much gold it destabilized economies along his route, became a potent legend. These stories, carried on the same indirect information currents, challenged the emerging European perception of Africa as a dark continent devoid of history or learning. They hinted at powerful, organized societies with their own rich intellectual traditions, connected to global networks of faith and commerce. The silent, patient camels crossing the dunes were carrying more than sacks of salt. They were transmitting a complete cultural and scholarly package, proving that even the world's harshest landscape could not stop the human drive to connect and learn. The greatest highways of the medieval world were not made of stone but of flowing water. While the Hanseatic League mastered the northern seas, another group of Norse adventurers looked inland, turning the vast river systems of Eastern Europe into their own personal express lanes. This was the legendary route from the Varangians to the Greeks, a liquid superhighway that connected the Viking homelands of Scandinavia directly to the golden domes of Constantinople. Picture the immense journey, a feat of navigation and sheer will. Starting in the Baltic, these traders, known as Rus or Varangians, would sail their shallow draft longships upriver, then face the most grueling part, the portage. When river rapids or watersheds blocked their path, they would physically haul their vessels overland on log rollers, dragging them from one river system to the next until they could launch again into the waters flowing south toward the Black Sea. It was a brutal, expensive process, which tells us the rewards at the end were unimaginably valuable. The obvious cargoes flowing north were the things that made Norse chieftains rich: Arabian silver coins, Byzantine silk, and exquisite glassware. Heading south were the raw riches of the northern forests, bundles of luxurious furs, jars of honey and wax, and in a tragic reality of the era, captured individuals sold into servitude. But if we look only at these goods, we miss the route's true, transformative function. The Vikings on these rivers were not just raiders or merchants, they became cultural couriers, the essential intermediaries between two colossal worlds, the Byzantine Empire and the emerging Slavic kingdoms. Their ships carried a cargo of ideas that would forge a new national identity. The most visible import was a new faith. When the Varangian ruler Vladimir the Great of Kiev chose to adopt Byzantine Christianity in the year 988, it was not an abstract theological decision. It was a strategic political and cultural alignment, facilitated by decades of contact along this river route. With the faith came its entire cultural package. Byzantine priests, architects, and artists arrived in Kiev, bringing the knowledge to construct stone churches like the magnificent St. Sophia Cathedral, adorned with mosaics and frescoes. They brought a new legal code based on Roman Byzantine principles, which helped consolidate state power. Most lastingly, they brought a written language. The Slavic apostles Cyril and Methodius had already developed the Glagolitic script, but their followers, operating in Byzantine spheres of influence, refined it into the Cyrillic alphabet, a system perfectly suited to Slavic sounds. This script traveled north along the river highways, adopted by the Rus to write their chronicles, laws, and religious texts, giving birth to a literary tradition that endures to this day. The Vikings also transmitted more subtle technologies of power, martial innovations in armor, siegecraft, and military organization, observed in Constantinople that strengthened the armies of the Kievan princes. In return, the Varangians brought northern martial vigor and organizational skills south, famously forming the elite Varangian Guard, the personal protectors of the Byzantine emperor, a unit comprised of Norse and later Anglo-Saxon warriors. This created a continuous feedback loop of people and practices. The river route proved that waterways could integrate regions more deeply than any land road, because a ship can carry not just more weight, but an entire civilization's toolkit. The Vikings began their journeys as freelance traders seeking silver, but in weaving this aquatic network, they inadvertently became the midwives for a new European power, one built on a fusion of northern ambition and southern sophistication, all flowing along the same timeless currents. The river highways of the Vikings carried the architecture of empires, but another kind of traveler was building a different Europe with their footsteps. They walked not for gold or conquest, but for grace. The pilgrimage routes to Santiago de Compostela generated one of the largest and most sustained human migrations of the Middle Ages, a river of faith that flowed in reverse, drawing hundreds of thousands of people from every corner of the continent toward a single point in northwestern Spain. This was not a silent, solitary journey. It was a massive, moving forum, a living network where culture was exchanged as freely as bread and water. For months at a time, nobles walked alongside peasants, scholars alongside farmers, all united by a common goal. In the evenings, gathered in crowded hostels or around fires, the real pilgrimage happened. Travelers swapped stories from their homelands, shared news of distant conflicts or harvests, and sang songs in a dozen different languages that slowly began to borrow from one another. This constant, slow-motion mixing of people was a powerful engine for cultural homogenization. A French pilgrim might learn a new farming technique from a German companion, while an Italian merchant shared the latest political gossip from Rome. The route itself became a linear city pulsing with life and conversation. The physical landscape of the Camino bears permanent witness to this exchange. To accommodate the endless stream of the faithful, a vast infrastructure of support sprang up. Monasteries, hostels, and hospitals were built a day's walk apart. And most strikingly, churches. To serve these mobile congregations, local communities began constructing larger, more impressive churches in the latest styles. The sturdy, rounded arches of the Romanesque style, and later the soaring vaults of Gothic architecture, did not spread through textbooks or royal decrees. They traveled on the sandals of pilgrims. A pilgrim from Burgundy, having seen a revolutionary new chapel design in France, would describe it to a stonemason in Leon. Master builders and their teams would themselves travel the routes, moving from one cathedral project to the next, carrying design ideas across national borders. The iconic Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, with its majestic portico of glory, is the ultimate destination of this architectural conversation, a masterpiece built by the collective inspiration of a continent on the move. Perhaps the most profound transmission, however, was in story. The pilgrimage fostered a shared European identity, woven from a common repository of legends and saints' lives. Tales of miracles and martyrdom, collected in books like the 12th century Codex Calixtinus, were read aloud in hostels and performed in town squares. These stories, repeated in countless vernacular languages along the way, helped standardize a core set of Christian narratives and values across diverse regions. They also spurred an explosion of vernacular literature as poets and storytellers crafted works for this vast, captive audience. The Camino was a university of the common person, where faith acted as the ultimate vector, carrying not just souls to a shrine, but carrying the very ideas that would bind a fragmented continent into a recognizable cultural whole. While pilgrims walked in faith, others sailed for conquest, yet returned with something far more valuable than holy relics. The Crusades, a centuries-long period of conflict and contact, violently rewired the Mediterranean's connections, creating a volatile triangular trade between the Italian city-states, the Levant, and North Africa. Beneath the clash of armies, a quieter, more enduring revolution was taking place. The great maritime republics of Venice and Genoa, savvy and opportunistic, used the Crusader states as commercial beachheads. They negotiated exclusive trading rights, established fortified colonies in ports like Acre and Tyre, and built a logistical network to supply the distant European armies. This network, however, soon began carrying cargoes that had nothing to do with war. Ships returning to Italy held sacks of a new, addictive luxury, sugar, grown in Crusader plantations using techniques learned from the Arab world. They carried bales of fine cotton, a fabric that would transform European clothing. They transported exquisite glassware, intricate metalwork, and new dyes. But the most transformative imports were not physical at all. They were ideas contained in thousands of handwritten books, for in the wake of the Crusades, European scholars awoke to a staggering realization. The classical knowledge of ancient Greece and Rome, much of which had been lost in the West after the fall of Rome, had not vanished. It had been preserved, studied, commented upon, and vastly expanded by Islamic scholars across the Mediterranean world, from Baghdad and Damascus to Cordoba and Palermo. This library of the ancient world, augmented by centuries of Islamic innovation in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy, was sitting there waiting. The Italian trade routes, now robust from supplying the Crusades, became the delivery system for this intellectual treasure. The key nodes in this transfer were not in the war-torn Holy Land, but in peaceful frontier cities like Toledo in Spain and Palermo in Sicily. After Christian rulers reclaimed these territories, they found thriving, multicultural societies where Muslim, Jewish, and Christian scholars worked side by side. In Toledo, Archbishop Raymond established a formal translation bureau. Here, teams of scholars, often a Jewish or Christian translator working from Arabic into Castilian, and then a Latinist turning that into the scholarly language of Europe, worked methodically through the stacks. Think of this not as simple copying, but as data migration on a continental scale. They translated the complete works of Aristotle, whose logical frameworks had been forgotten in the West. They brought over the medical encyclopedias of Avicenna and the surgical manuals of Al-Zarawi, which would become standard textbooks for European physicians for 500 years. From Sicily came the astronomical tables of Al-Zarqali and the groundbreaking mathematical texts of scholars like Al-Khwarizmi, whose name gives us the word algorithm, and whose work introduced Europe to algebra and the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, including the revolutionary concept of zero. This was not a trickle of information, it was a flash flood. The translation movement in the 12th and 13th centuries represents the single greatest transfer of knowledge in the medieval era. It was as if Europe had been trying to rebuild a complex machine with half the manual, and suddenly the complete set of blueprints, plus several volumes of advanced upgrades, arrived all at once. This influx of texts did not just add to European knowledge, it fundamentally rewired the European mind. It provided the tools for systematic inquiry, for challenging old authorities with logic and observation. The rediscovery of Aristotle's natural philosophy, fused with Christian theology by thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, created scholasticism, the dominant intellectual method of the High Middle Ages. The new mathematics enabled advances in engineering, architecture, and, crucially, navigation. The Crusades began as a military and religious campaign, but their most enduring legacy was this accidental, paradoxical gift, a torrent of ancient and foreign learning that poured back into Europe along the very supply lines built to sustain its armies, reigniting the spark of rational inquiry that would eventually light the fires of the Renaissance. Salt was the white gold of the ancient world, a biological necessity that built empires and carved pathways across the continent. While we think of it today as a simple seasoning, in the medieval era it was a matter of life and death, essential for preserving food through long winters and sustaining livestock. This fundamental need forged specialized highways known as the salt roads, and their story reveals how a basic commodity could weave together the social and political fabric of Europe. The most famous of these was the Via Regia in Italy, a road whose very name means salt way, connecting the salt pans at the mouth of the Tiber River to the communities of the Sabine Hills. In the north, the rich deposits beneath the town of Lüneburg in Germany fed a network of trails reaching across the Hanseatic world. These were not casual paths, they were economic lifelines, and control over them translated directly into power. Whoever held the salt mines or taxed the salt trade held immense leverage over entire regions, influencing diets, economies, and even the outcomes of conflicts. This necessity forced innovation in governance. To manage and profit from the salt trade, authorities developed sophisticated systems of administration. Standardized measures for a bushel of salt had to be enforced. Tolls were collected at strategic points requiring careful record-keeping. Permits and licenses were issued to approved merchants. In essence, the bureaucracy of the salt trade became a classroom for early statecraft, disseminating new forms of organization, accounting, and law enforcement along its routes. The caravans themselves were mobile hubs of information. A train of wagons laden with salt blocks was never just that. It was a magnet for other commerce. Traders dealing in iron tools, woolen cloth, or pottery would join the procession for safety and guaranteed passage. News traveled with them. A merchant from a coastal city might share word of a ship's arrival or a shift in market prices with a farmer from an isolated alpine valley. Over generations, this constant, slow movement of people along fixed corridors did something profound to culture. Linguistic dialects blended at way stations, creating regional trade pigeons. Folk songs and stories were exchanged around campfires at salt markets, with tales from the mountains slowly migrating to the plains and vice versa. Seasonal festivals tied to the salt trade calendar, like the great markets at places like Halle or Salzburg, became annual events where not only goods but marriages, alliances, and artistic styles were negotiated. The salt roads demonstrate a powerful truth that the most functional networks built for sheer survival often become the most enduring channels for everything else that makes us human. They preserved communities by preserving food, but in doing so, they also preserved and transmitted the very patterns of language, story, and social connection that defined those communities across generations. The Roman legionaries' daily ration was more than a drink. It was a statement of civilization. Far from the vineyards of Italy, a soldier stationed on the rainy frontier of Germania would receive his measure of wine, a tangible connection to the distant Mediterranean world he was ordered to defend. This systematic demand created the first great wine trade routes of Gaul, transforming the region into a vast vineyard supplying the empire's northern edge. Rivers like the Rhône and the Garonne became liquid highways, their currents carrying amphorae of wine to military forts and burgeoning towns from Britannia to the Rhine. When the political structure of Rome itself crumbled, however, its taste for wine did not. The crucial custodians of this tradition were the monastic communities that dotted the European landscape. In their quiet cloisters, monks did far more than pray. They became Europe's most meticulous vintners. Orders like the Benedictines and Cistercians preserved and refined Roman viticultural knowledge, treating the vineyard as an extension of their divine work. They selected the best grape varieties, perfected pruning techniques, and carefully documented the influence of soil and sunlight, turning winemaking into a sacred science. Their monasteries, often built along those old Roman supply routes, became new nodes in the network, producing wine not just for sacrament and sustenance, but for trade. This monastic wine trade carried a surprising cargo of practical knowledge. To store and transport their product, monasteries needed reliable containers. This demand spurred advances in local glassmaking, particularly in forested regions like Lorraine and Normandy, where abundant wood fuel fed the furnaces. The technology for stronger, more uniform glass bottles slowly disseminated along the trade paths, a quiet innovation in packaging that would one day revolutionize how the world consumed wine. But the trade's most profound impact was social. Where these routes converged, great periodic markets sprang to life. The most famous were the Champagne fairs of northeastern France. For several weeks each year, these transformed sleepy towns into bustling international marketplaces. Merchants from Flanders brought fine woolen cloth, Italians arrived with spices and silks, and German traders brought furs and metalwork. And at the heart of it all were the barrels of wine from monastic and noble estates. The chaos of so much cross-currency trade, however, created a problem that demanded a brilliant solution. A merchant from Genoa did not want to travel home with a heavy chest of French coins. He wanted a secure, lightweight promise of payment. From this need emerged early financial instruments, the most important being the letter of credit. A merchant could deposit money with a banker at one fair and receive a written note, which he could then present at a different fair or a distant banking house to redeem its value. This was a revolution in trust, transforming fragile parchment into a portable form of money. Networks of these bankers, often from Lombardy or Cahors, began to coordinate accounts across Europe, laying the foundational ledgers of modern finance. So, while the Roman soldier's wine connected him to an empire's power, the medieval wine trade connected markets in a web of credit and commerce, proving that the roots of the global banking system were watered not in distant counting houses, but in the vineyards of France and the lively, wine-soaked fairs their product made possible. The softest luxury in the world began with a snap in the frozen silence of a northern forest. While Mediterranean merchants traded in spices and silk, a different kind of treasure was being gathered in the vast boreal woodlands of Scandinavia and Russia, where the pursuit of luxury furs like sable, ermine, and fox wove an intricate web of survival and power. This was not a single road but a capillary network of forest trails, frozen rivers, and portages, a decentralized system mastered first by Finno-Ugric and Slavic tribes who knew the deep woods as their home. Their expertise turned the remote Arctic and subarctic into a productive hinterland for the entire continent, connecting the edge of the tundra to the bustling markets of Constantinople and beyond. The value of a single perfect black sable pelt was astronomical, worth a small fortune in silver or silk, making it a currency of kings and clergy. But the true wealth of this network was the specialized knowledge required to tap it. The trade transmitted sophisticated hunting technologies far and wide, like the use of specialized traps and snares that could catch valuable animals without damaging their pristine coats. It circulated a deep, intimate understanding of forest ecology, tracking patterns, survival skills for brutal winters, and the medicinal use of local plants. This was practical, life-saving information that moved along the same paths as the bundled pelts. Perhaps more subtly, the fur routes also carried a spiritual worldview. The forest tribes practiced animistic beliefs, seeing spirits in trees, stones, and animals. As fur traders from these cultures interacted with Slavic communities and later with Christian missionaries from Novgorod and Kiev, a fascinating exchange occurred. Pagan motifs like protective symbols or stories of forest spirits were woven into local Christian iconography or persisted in folk tales. The veneration of Saint Nicholas, for instance, who inherited some attributes of a pre-Christian winter god, shows how belief systems traveled and merged along these wooded corridors. This trade did something revolutionary for the political landscape. It integrated the most remote, scattered communities into a vast economic system. A hunter in the distant Urals, through a chain of middlemen, was now connected to the fashion demands of a Byzantine aristocrat. The wealth generated by this flow of furs accumulated in the hands of those who controlled the trade routes, most notably the merchants of the Novgorod Republic. Sitting at the northwestern terminus of the route from the Volga, Novgorod became a fur trading superpower, its wealth evident in its magnificent cathedral and fierce independence. This river of fur wealth then flowed south, financing the rise of the Grand Duchy of Moscow. Muscovite princes used their control over fur tribute from conquered tribes and their access to the trade networks to build a war chest, funding armies, constructing fortifications, and ultimately throwing off the Mongol yoke. The sable on a prince's robe was not just a status symbol. It was a testament to a hidden economic engine that had quietly financed the creation of a new Russian state, proving that the softest commodities could forge the hardest borders. A single peppercorn held the scent of an entire ocean. Before Portuguese caravels ever rounded the Cape of Good Hope, the flavors that defined European luxury traveled a fragile, multi-stage journey that was a masterclass in controlled information. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg began their voyage on Arab and Indian dhows crossing the Indian Ocean. These ships would dock at ports like Aden or Jeddah on the Red Sea, where their precious cargo was unloaded. From there, the spices began a treacherous overland trek, carried by camel caravans across the desert to the Nile River. Once on the river, they were floated north to the great emporium of Alexandria, the final bottleneck. And there, waiting in their fondacos, were the Venetian and Genoese merchants, the only Europeans granted the privilege to purchase these goods. They could not travel further east themselves. They were utterly dependent on this long, brittle chain of intermediaries. This was not merely a trade route, it was a tightly controlled information filter. The Arab and Indian merchants who mastered the monsoon winds held all the cards. They knew the sources, the true distances, the navigation secrets. For Europeans, the lands beyond Alexandria were a realm of lucrative mystery. Yet, even a filtered pipeline leaks profound knowledge. Alongside the sacks of pepper came detailed sailing directions, descriptions of distant ports, and celestial charts used by Arab navigators. These documents, often compiled into books called portolans, slowly gave European cartographers a clearer, though still second-hand, picture of the Indian Ocean world. The spices themselves were packets of botanical data. Apothecaries in cities like Salerno or Montpellier studied their properties, incorporating nutmeg as a digestive aid or cloves for dental pain, expanding the European pharmacopoeia with knowledge from Malay and Javanese herbalists. The astronomical profits from this trade, however, created a powerful incentive to break the system. Venetian palaces and Genoese banks were literally built on the markups of this relay. Every middleman added cost, and every overland journey added risk. For the kingdoms of the Atlantic fringe, like Portugal and Spain, this was an intolerable information monopoly. The desire to find a direct sea route to the spice sources was not born from mere curiosity. It was a calculated effort to seize the information flow itself. To control the route was to control the maps, the contacts, the prices, and the very narrative of what lay beyond the horizon. The age of exploration, then, was in many ways a corporate espionage mission on a global scale, funded by the immense value of the very spice pipeline they aimed to destroy. The most revolutionary cargo on the Silk Road was not silk, but a recipe. While caravans carried bolts of precious fabric, they also carried the knowledge of how to make something far more transformative: paper. This Chinese invention, perfected centuries earlier, began its slow journey westward not as a product, but as a secret, a manufacturing process that would fundamentally rewire how Europe thought and remembered. Its path is a map of intellectual transmission. After the Battle of Tollas in the 8th century, captured Chinese artisans reportedly shared the technique with their Arab captors in Central Asia. The city of Samarkand, with its abundant flax and clean water, became the first great paper-making hub outside of China. From there, the technology flowed to the beating heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, Baghdad, where the famous House of Wisdom thrived, its scholars copying and commenting on vast libraries of texts onto this new, efficient medium. Paper did not just travel, it adapted. Arab artisans improved the process by using linen rags, creating a stronger, more versatile sheet. This improved recipe then crossed the Mediterranean, carried by Muslim craftsmen into Moorish Spain and Sicily. In cities like Zativa and Palermo, the first European paper mills began their rhythmic pounding, turning old cloth into a blank slate for a new age. This was a revolution in information technology more profound than any luxury good. Before paper, writing in Europe was trapped on expensive, labor-intensive mediums. Parchment, made from scraped animal skins, was so costly that a single book might require the skins of an entire herd. Papyrus, imported from Egypt, was brittle and susceptible to damp. Paper changed the economics of knowledge. It was cheap, durable, and could be produced locally from recycled materials. Suddenly, the cost of writing plummeted. This democratized record-keeping, allowing not just kings and monasteries, but merchants, guilds, and town councils to maintain detailed accounts, draft contracts, and keep civic records. The floodgates for literature and education began to creak open. The final, pivotal leap occurred in the 13th century in the Italian town of Fabriano. Here, craftsmen combined the imported Arab technique with their own innovations, harnessing water wheels to power trip hammers that pulped the rags, creating paper of exceptional quality and consistency on an industrial scale. The Fabriano mills became the data centers of the late medieval world, their product feeding the rising hunger of Italian merchant banks, university scriptoria, and early government administrations. The explosion of paperwork, in the most literal sense, supercharged European bureaucracy, making complex commerce and governance possible. More importantly, it fed the scholarly revival. The works of Aristotle, translated from Arabic onto paper in Toledo, could now be copied more quickly and cheaply in Bologna or Paris, spreading through a growing network of universities. The trade in a single process, the recipe for pulping rags into sheets, did more to accelerate European thought than 1,000 caravans of silk, proving that the most powerful ideas are often those that teach us how to store and share all the others. The recipe for paper spread through words, but another recipe, one forged in fire, traveled as ingots. Long before written contracts, the most binding agreements were sealed in bronze, an alloy that demanded a marriage of distant lands. Tin from the storm-lashed cliffs of Cornwall and copper from the mines of the Alps and the ore mountains created a metallurgical backbone for Europe, a network so vital it pulsed with life from the Bronze Age straight through the medieval era. This was not a trade in luxuries, but in the very substance of power and progress. The tin ships that braved the Atlantic from Britain to the Mediterranean, and the copper caravans winding through Central European passes, were carrying the potential for civilization itself. Where these two metals met in the hands of a skilled smith, a technological revolution was born. Bronze tools cut forests and tilled fields more efficiently than stone. Bronze weapons decided battles. This essential demand created the first truly pan-European industrial supply chain, linking the Atlantic fringe to the heart of the continent and beyond. The true genius of this network, however, moved not in the cargo holds but with the people. Mining and metalworking were specialized, secretive arts. A master smelter knew how to read the color of flame to achieve the perfect temperature, and an alloyer understood the precise ratio to make bronze ring true. These craftsmen became Europe's first itinerant engineers, traveling from mine to forge to royal court, their knowledge their most valuable possession. As they moved, they formed close-knit, almost guild-like communities that transcended local language and loyalty. A smith from Cornwall might share a furnace with one from Saxony, exchanging techniques for improving a bellows or refining ore. This slow, person-to-person transmission meant that a metallurgical breakthrough in one region could, over generations, ripple across the entire continent, standardizing technology in a way that political empires never could. Control of these metal routes translated directly into military and economic dominance. A lord who secured a reliable supply of tin could arm his followers with superior weapons and tools, projecting power over his neighbors. The distribution patterns of metal goods, meticulously mapped by archaeologists, tell a silent story of influence and connection. A distinctive style of bronze pin found in a chieftain's grave in Sweden might have its closest match in a hoard discovered in Hungary, tracing a line of trade or alliance across the map. These objects are frozen signals, proving that technological paradigms spread along these metallic arteries. Even as the Iron Age dawned, the copper and tin networks adapted, shifting to supply the brass for ecclesiastical fittings, maritime instruments, and everyday utensils. The demand changed, but the channels remained, worn deep by millennia of necessity. The humble ingot, therefore, was more than a commodity. It was a carrier wave for the very skills that built, defended, and connected the medieval world, its legacy still ringing in the alloy of every church bell cast during the Age of Faith. The most tragic trade routes of the medieval world were those that trafficked in people. A difficult but undeniable aspect of the early medieval economy was the movement of human captives, a system that flowed from multiple sources toward points of demand, creating a grim network that left a lasting mark on language itself. The very word slave derives from Slav, reflecting the prominence of individuals taken from the Slavic regions of Eastern Europe. Other captives were taken from the British Isles and Viking raids along European coasts, their journeys often ending in the wealthy markets of the Islamic world or within the great estates of Europe itself. While we must approach this history with respect for the profound hardship it represents, we can also observe that these involuntary pathways, like all sustained human contact, became channels for an unintended and complex form of exchange. Individuals taken from their homes were more than captives, they were carriers of practical knowledge. A Slavic woodworker with a unique technique for joinery, or a Celtic metalworker skilled in intricate designs, brought those abilities to a new master's workshop. In the Islamic world, a literate slave from a Byzantine region might serve as a scribe or administrator, transferring not just the act of writing, but the bureaucratic methods and literary styles of one culture into another. The economic scale of this trade shaped societies in profound ways. The wealth generated from selling captives provided capital for emerging states, like the early Kingdom of the Rus, to build and consolidate power. The legal frameworks that developed to regulate the status, sale, and treatment of these individuals became some of the earliest and most detailed commercial and property laws in many regions, formally embedding social hierarchies into the legal code. The diplomatic relations required to facilitate or curtail this trade forced distant rulers and merchants into negotiation, creating maps of influence and obligation that had little to do with formal borders. This legacy intertwines deep coercion with a stark, accidental form of cultural transmission. It reminds us that the medieval information highways carried every kind of signal, including those born of loss, and that the development of Europe was shaped not only by the goods that were willingly traded, but also by the skills and presences of those who were traded unwillingly, leaving a complex imprint on law, language, and craft that historians continue to carefully unpack today. A sealed scroll carried more immediate power than a chest of silver. While merchants moved the goods of empires, a separate, faster network moved the will of empires themselves. These were the diplomatic courier systems, the dedicated fiber optics of the ancient and medieval world, where the messenger was the packet of data and speed was the ultimate currency. The model was set by Rome with its cursus publicus, a state-run relay service that used way stations spaced a day's ride apart. A government courier, bearing an imperial dispatch or a governor's report, could change his tired horse for a fresh one at each station, maintaining a blistering pace across thousands of miles of paved road. This system did not just carry mail, it was the central nervous system of imperial administration, allowing Rome to project its authority and react to rebellions or invasions with a speed its enemies could not match. When the Western Roman Empire faded, the Eastern Byzantine Empire refined the model into the dromos, meaning the course or the run. This was not merely a postal service, it was a strategic intelligence apparatus. Byzantine couriers, often trusted soldiers or eunuch officials, carried encrypted diplomatic correspondence, detailed spy reports from border regions, and sensitive military orders. The security of these messages was paramount, leading to the use of complex ciphers and sealed, tamper-evident containers. The efficiency of the dromos allowed the Byzantine emperors in Constantinople to manage a sprawling, multi-ethnic empire, coordinating defenses on the Danube one week and negotiating with ambassadors from Cairo the next. It turned geographic space into manageable information space, but the most formidable system of all arose from the steppes. The Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in history, was held together not by stone fortresses but by information velocity. Their network, called the YAM, was a masterpiece of logistical planning. Relay stations were established roughly every 20 to 30 miles across the entire empire, from Hungary to Korea. At each station, a messenger would find fresh horses, food, and shelter, allowing him to travel up to 200 miles in a single day. Special passports called paesi granted the courier absolute priority, demanding immediate service from any station and safe passage through any territory. The Mongols understood that to rule such vast distances, news had to travel faster than rebellion. A report of unrest in Persia could reach the Great Khan in Mongolia in a matter of weeks, not months, enabling a rapid and devastating response. The cargo of these networks was the raw material of statecraft, peace treaties that could end wars, tax assessments that funded armies, succession announcements that prevented civil strife, and census data that mapped the empire's human resources. Their existence created a new standard for information reliability. For the first time, a ruler could make a decision based on intelligence that was merely weeks old, not hopelessly outdated. This reliability, in turn, fostered a new kind of governance, one based on systematic reporting and centralized response. The legacy of these courier systems echoes in every modern postal service and diplomatic bag. They proved that for a state to be large, it first had to be fast, and that maintaining exclusive, high-speed information lanes was not a luxury, but the very sinew of power. While kings controlled the messengers, however, another network thrived in the shadows of their empires, one that moved the most controversial knowledge of all. The speed of a Mongol courier was unmatched, but the rhythm of a European fare was predictable, and that predictability built trust. In the rolling hills of Champagne, time itself became a tool for connection. For nearly 2 centuries, a cycle of 6 great fairs, rotating between the towns of Troyes, Provence, Bar-sur-Aube, and Lagny, created Europe's most reliable annual data sync. This was not a random market, but a scheduled continental convention, a place where the fragmented medieval economy came together to calibrate its weights, its values, and its news. Merchants from Genoa and Venice, from the cloth towns of Flanders, from the German lands and beyond, would mark their calendars and prepare their caravans, knowing that at a specific time, in a specific place, the entire commercial world would convene. The goods on display were spectacular: Flemish wool, Italian silks, spices from the East, leathers, furs, and metals, but the real transactions were intangible. In the chatter of the marketplace and the quiet intensity of the negotiation tables, A merchant from Bruges learned the current price of pepper in Alexandria from a Genoese colleague. A German trader heard a first-hand account of political turmoil in Lombardy that might affect his next journey. This was a live feed of the European condition, where gossip about a poor harvest or a prince's illness was as valuable as gold because it allowed for anticipating scarcity or opportunity months in advance. The fairs became the primary source for setting benchmark prices for key commodities across the continent, a medieval version of a commodities exchange. This regular convergence forced innovation in the very language of commerce. With so many different legal traditions colliding, a common framework was essential. The fair authorities, often the counts of Champagne themselves, provided a stable legal environment and special courts to swiftly resolve disputes between merchants of different nations. From these rulings emerged a body of customary practices that transcended local law, the early seeds of international merchant law, or lex mercatoria. It established standard procedures for contracts, debt recovery, and partnerships that everyone, regardless of origin, could understand and trust. The most revolutionary innovation born here was financial. The sheer volume and variety of currency presented a problem. How could a merchant from Florence, paid in heavy silver coins from Paris, easily purchase goods from a supplier who wanted payment in the currency of Cologne? The solution was the letter of fare, a forerunner to the modern bill of exchange. A merchant could deposit his money with a money changer or banker at the fair and receive a credit note. This note, a lightweight piece of parchment, could then be presented at a subsequent fair or at a banking house in another city to redeem its value. This system freed capital from the physical burden of coin, reduced the risk of highway robbery, and created a web of credit that linked European financial centers. The bankers themselves, often Italians from Siena or Lucca, set up tables and kept meticulous ledgers, their networks forming the first true international banking system. The Champagne fairs were more than a marketplace. They were a periodic reset button for Europe's commercial operating system, where data was synchronized, protocols were updated, and the entire network emerged stronger, ready for another year of trade. The bustling fairs of Champagne calibrated commerce, but a quieter, more resilient web was being woven in stone and silence. Far from the clamor of markets, monasteries stood as serene fortresses of knowledge, their isolation a carefully crafted illusion. Beneath their vow of stability, monks were among medieval Europe's most prolific communicators, operating a spiritual internet that hummed with letters, manuscripts, and shared innovation. Orders like the Benedictines and Cistercians functioned as vast, decentralized corporations, with each abbey a node in a continent-spanning network. Through a constant flow of correspondence and the regular movement of personnel between mother houses and their daughter foundations, these communities maintained a remarkable unity of practice and purpose across hundreds of miles. A new hymn composed in Cluny could be sung in Canterbury within a season. A report of a miraculous healing at one shrine would ripple through the network, drawing pilgrims along routes that soon became well-trodden paths of faith and news. This exchange was profoundly practical. Monasteries were economic powerhouses, and their survival depended on sharing best practices. Through letters and visitations, they disseminated agricultural breakthroughs, like improved crop rotations or novel irrigation methods perfected in one region's fields. Architectural innovation traveled in the minds and sketchbooks of itinerant master masons. When the Cistercians, seeking austere beauty, developed a distinctive, unadorned style of building that emphasized light and space, the plans for these elegant churches spread rapidly from Burgundy to Yorkshire to the frontiers of Eastern Europe. Each new abbey was both a spiritual statement and a broadcast of a specific architectural template, built by teams of lay brothers who carried the order's technical knowledge with them. The heart of this network, however, was the scriptorium. In these quiet writing rooms, the slow, sacred work of copying texts turned monasteries into the data servers of the age. While secular trade routes might carry a single precious book, the monastic network was designed for mass duplication and preservation. Monks meticulously copied not only liturgical works and scripture, but also the surviving texts of classical antiquity, works by Cicero, Virgil, and Plato that had survived the collapse of the Roman world. For centuries, these silent scribes were the primary guardians of this fragile intellectual inheritance, ensuring that the voice of the ancient world was not entirely lost in what later eras would call the Dark Ages. Later, as universities arose in cities like Paris and Bologna, the monastic network seamlessly adapted to become a distribution channel for new scholarship. Theological debates from the lecture halls, the intricate arguments of thinkers like Thomas Aquinas, were transcribed onto parchment in monastic scriptoria and then sent along the familiar routes to other abbeys and cathedral schools, fueling intellectual revolutions from a distance. This system was uniquely resilient. While a war could disrupt a king's road or a plague could empty a trading city, the monastic network was decentralized and driven by a non-economic motive. Its operations continued through famines, conflicts, and political chaos, providing a stable, parallel information highway that often collaborated with secular routes. A merchant might carry the physical parchment, but a monk had often inscribed its words. This spiritual web, built on prayer and routine, proved that some of the most enduring connections are forged not for profit, but for purpose, silently threading the continent together with ink, faith, and shared knowledge. A Venetian merchant's most valuable cargo was a sealed letter he never opened. While the monastic network hummed with spiritual knowledge, the great maritime republics of Venice and Genoa built something far more ruthless, a corporate intelligence apparatus that treated information as a strategic commodity. Their power did not rest solely on the strength of their galleys, but on the quiet efficiency of their spies, consuls, and informants embedded in every major port from Alexandria to Kaffa. These agents were the human sensors of a vast Mediterranean data grid. A Venetian consul in Beirut did not just oversee trade, he cultivated relationships with local officials, bribed customs clerks, and listened intently to the gossip of the bazaar. His reports back to the Doge's palace would contain everything from the projected yield of the Cypriot cotton harvest to rumors of an impending Mamluk military campaign, from shifts in the political winds of Constantinople to the arrival dates of rival Genoese convoys. This was not casual news gathering. It was systematic, state-sanctioned espionage designed to mitigate risk and seize opportunity. The intelligence flowed into central archives like the Venetian Archivio di Stato, where clerks meticulously cross-referenced reports to build a dynamic, living portrait of the world. A map in a Venetian merchant's manual was more than a chart of coastlines. It was a layered dashboard of political risk. Alongside notes on safe harbors and prevailing winds, you might find annotations warning of unstable local rulers, regions known for piracy, or ports with extortionate customs duties. These guides, known as ragioni or tarif, transformed lived experience and covert intelligence into actionable business strategy. A merchant planning a voyage to the Black Sea could consult these manuals to learn not only how to navigate the Bosporus, but which official in Trebizond was most amenable to a bribe, and what the current price of alum was in 3 different markets. This gave the maritime republics a predictive edge that felt almost clairvoyant. If a report from their network indicated a poor wheat harvest in Egypt, Venetian merchants could dispatch ships to buy up surplus grain from Sicily before prices spiked, securing massive profits. If an informant whispered of a planned embargo, the Signoria could reroute entire fleets overnight. This system turned information into a direct source of capital, allowing Venice and Genoa to outmaneuver competitors who merely reacted to events. Their consulates became fortified nodes in this network, diplomatic outposts that doubled as intelligence hubs and secure banking houses, ensuring that profit, politics, and secret knowledge flowed along the same protected channels. In an age without satellites or instant communication, these republics proved that the most formidable empire could be one built not on land, but on knowing what was happening everywhere long before anyone else did. A book in the 13th century was not merely a possession, it was a portable revolution. As the great universities of Paris, Bologna, and Oxford crystallized into centers of learning, they demanded a new kind of infrastructure, one that could feed hungry minds with consistent, reliable knowledge. This demand birthed a specialized trade network dedicated solely to the creation and distribution of ideas. At its heart were the stationers, the licensed booksellers and manuscript dealers who set up shop in the shadow of lecture halls. They did not just sell finished books, they orchestrated their production. A master in theology would bring his lecture notes, his reportatio, to the stationer, who would then hire a team of scribes to copy it, piece by piece, in a process called the Picia system. Each scribe might copy a different section or quire of the book simultaneously, dramatically speeding up production. The stationer also sourced the raw materials, the fine parchment from sheepskins prepared in specialized towns, the inks from particular regions known for their rich pigments, and the sturdy leather for bindings. This turned the university district into a bustling intellectual marketplace, with its own supply chains, quality controls, and fixed prices approved by the university itself. The true dynamism of this network, however, came from its human element. The medieval scholar was inherently mobile. A student from Poland might begin his studies in Prague, then travel to Heidelberg to hear a renowned master debate a point of canon law, and finally complete his degree in Padua. Masters, too, were celebrities who moved between universities, lured by better salaries or the intellectual ferment of a new center. These peripatetic scholars were walking libraries. In their saddlebags, alongside their personal effects, they carried precious personal copies of key texts, annotated with their own insights and the glosses of their teachers. When they arrived at a new university, they did not just bring their expertise, they brought a physical piece of the intellectual conversation from their last posting. A legal commentary perfected in Bologna would be debated in a classroom in Oxford within a year. A novel theological argument born in Parisian disputations could challenge orthodoxies in Krakow soon after. This constant circulation of people created a vibrant, self-reinforcing intellectual circuit. The debates that crackled in these lecture halls were not confined by stone walls. Through the stationers' network, the most compelling ideas were captured, copied, and disseminated. Scholastic method, with its rigorous question and answer format designed to reconcile faith and reason, became a standardized software for thinking, transmitted across the continent in thousands of uniform sentences commentaries. Innovations in civil law, interpretations of Roman code that would shape modern jurisprudence, flowed out of Bologna along these paper routes. Even early scientific theories about optics, motion, and the nature of the heavens, often rooted in recovered Arabic texts, found a ready distribution system through this academic trade. The arrival of the printed press in the 15th century did not create this circuit, it supercharged an existing one. What had been a steady stream of manuscript copies became a flood of identical printed editions, making complex ideas cheaper, more accessible, and far more uniform. A student in Scotland and a scholar in Italy could now literally be on the same page, debating the same passage from the same printed edition of Aristotle. This formalized exchange ensured that a breakthrough was no longer a local event. It was a continental conversation, weaving the isolated intellectual sparks of the Middle Ages into the sustained fire of the European Enlightenment. The finest sword in Christendom was not forged for glory but for sale. While scholars traded in ideas, a far more visceral commerce pulsed across the continent, the relentless trade in arms and armor. This was a direct, high-stakes pipeline for military innovation, where the hardware of war itself became a commodity that reshaped battlefields from Scotland to the Holy Land. Workshops in cities like Toledo, Passau, and Milan earned legendary status, their names stamped on blades and breastplates as a guarantee of lethal quality. A knight from England would pay a fortune for a sword of Tolden steel, renowned for its flexible strength and razor edge, while an Italian condottiero would seek out the brilliantly articulated plate armor from Milan, a second skin of steel that could turn a lance strike. But these objects were never just products, they were the physical embodiment of cutting-edge metallurgy and engineering, and their movement across borders carried those secrets with them. The trade disseminated more than hardware, it transmitted the very knowledge of how to make it. Artisans, the rock stars of medieval industry, were highly mobile. A master armorer from Augsburg, with his proprietary techniques for tempering steel, might be lured to the court of the French king with promises of high pay and prestige. When he set up his forge in Paris, he did not work in isolation. Local smiths would observe, apprentice, and slowly absorb his methods. This migration of skill meant that a technological breakthrough in one city, a new method for producing stronger, lighter plate, or a more efficient crossbow latch design from Genoa, could ripple through the armories of Europe within a generation. The weapon you faced on the battlefield was often a product of international collaboration and industrial espionage long before the term existed. This constant flow of equipment naturally carried with it the tactics to use it. The widespread adoption of the crossbow, a complex machine traded from specialized centers, demanded new infantry formations and countermeasures, like the use of pavises, large shields carried by attendants. The increasing affordability and effectiveness of plate armor, thanks to more efficient production spread by trade, made the heavily armored knight the dominant force on the battlefield, which in turn spurred the development of new weapons designed to defeat that armor, like the poleaxe or the warhammer. Siegecraft, too, traveled along these routes. Detailed designs for trebuchets, mangonels, and later cannon were as valuable as the weapons themselves. Engineers and master gunners, often hired as mercenaries, sold their expertise to the highest bidder, bringing plans for sophisticated fortifications and the methods to breach them from one conflict to the next. A castle design perfected during the Crusades in the Levant might find its echo in a Welsh border fortress, its lessons learned in distant deserts now applied to rainy highlands. The result was a pan-European arms race fueled by commerce. No kingdom could afford to fall behind. If a rival state acquired a new type of siege engine or equipped its cavalry with superior armor, the response was not merely military, it was economic and diplomatic. Spies were dispatched to learn the secrets, merchants were commissioned to procure samples, and artisans were recruited to replicate the advantage. Warfare itself became a brutal form of information exchange, where every battle was a live test of technology, and the results were quickly analyzed and disseminated. This network, built on both the peaceful trade of goods and the violent trade of blows, ensured that the nature of medieval warfare evolved with a startling rapidity. The clash of armies was not just a contest of wills, but a loud, destructive conversation about engineering, logistics, and material science, a dialogue written in steel and settled on fields from Agincourt to Constantinople. A promise on parchment could move faster than a chest of gold. While swords and spices traveled on carts and ships, the most revolutionary cargo of the late medieval world was purely conceptual, a written agreement that transferred vast sums across continents without a single coin ever leaving a strongbox. This was the bill of exchange, the abstract engine that powered Europe's first true financial network. Born from the practical chaos of the Champagne fairs, it solved a simple but dangerous problem. A merchant from Florence, after selling his silks, did not want to journey home over the Alps with a wagon load of heavy, vulnerable French silver. Instead, he would deposit his earnings with a local money changer, receiving in return a carefully worded letter. This letter ordered the money changer's business partner in, say, Genoa, to pay the Florentine merchant the equivalent sum in his own local currency upon his return. Value had been teleported, secured by nothing but ink and trust. This system demanded a new kind of infrastructure, a web of reliable agents and correspondents stationed in every major commercial city, all keeping impeccable accounts. To manage the dizzying complexity of these credits, debits, and foreign exchange rates, Italian merchants in cities like Genoa and Venice perfected a new technology of information, double-entry bookkeeping. Every transaction was recorded twice as a debit in one account and a credit in another. This created a self-balancing system, a closed loop of data that made errors immediately apparent and gave a merchant, for the first time, a clear, instantaneous picture of his overall financial health. His ledger was no longer just a list of what he owned. It was a dynamic model of his entire commercial universe. This created a shadow economy of pure information, a parallel financial data stream that flowed silently beneath the physical movement of goods. Exchange rates between different coinages, the creditworthiness of distant trading houses, and the shifting patterns of debt and obligation all became critical forms of intelligence, traded as keenly as any spice. A merchant's success now depended not only on what he knew about markets, but on how well he was plugged into this financial network. The flow of credit information enabled ventures of unprecedented scale. It allowed a consortium of investors in Bruges to fund a galley voyage to Alexandria, spreading risk and pooling capital in ways previously impossible. It integrated regional markets because a debt incurred in Barcelona could be settled through a correspondent in Bruges, weaving local economies into a nascent continental system. The bill of exchange and the ledger did not just move money, they created a new layer of reality, a quantified world of obligations and opportunities that made the modern economy conceivable. The real treasure was no longer in the vault, it was in the ledger's elegant, unforgiving columns. The blueprint for a cathedral could fit inside a leather satchel. While financiers balanced their ledgers, another kind of wealth was being transferred through the hands of traveling masters, their journeys paid for by the deep pockets of piety and pride. Across Europe, a silent bidding war for talent was underway as popes, princes, and prosperous merchant guilds competed to commission works that would proclaim their power, piety, and sophistication. This demand created the artistic commission circuit, a dynamic network where the most sought-after creators became cultural couriers, carrying entire visual languages across mountain ranges and political borders. A master mason, having perfected the flying buttress at the building site of Chartres, might receive a compelling offer from a bishop in Cologne or a king in Bohemia, luring him east with promises of higher pay and immortal legacy. When he arrived, he did not come alone. In his possession were his most valuable tools, not just chisels and squares, but pattern books, scrolls of detailed sketches, and templates carved from thin wood or slate. These were the medieval equivalents of architectural software files, containing the precise geometry for a rose window, the elegant curve of a vault rib, or the intricate foliage of a capital. Through these portable portfolios, the Gothic style ceased to be a French invention and became a European conversation, adapted to local stone and light from Spain to Poland. The same circuit operated for painters and sculptors. When the wealthy Burgundian court desired altarpieces of unprecedented emotional depth and luminous color, they turned to the workshops of Flanders. Artists there had pioneered the use of oil paints, a medium that allowed for richer colors, finer detail, and astonishing realism in depicting textures like velvet, glass, and human skin. As the fame of these works spread, Italian patrons steeped in the classical tradition took notice. The desire for this new northern magic prompted a reverse flow. Flemish painters traveled to Venice or Florence, sometimes bringing their precious oils and techniques with them, while Italian artists journeyed north to study. This cross-pollination was transformative. You can see its result in the work of a painter like Antonello da Messina, who synthesized Flemish luminosity with Italian spatial clarity, helping to ignite the technical revolution of the Renaissance. The patrons were the network's architects, their commissions the data packets that routed talent across the map. A merchant family in Lübeck, enriched by the Hanseatic trade, would fund an altarpiece for their local church, specifying fashionable Flemish styles they had seen on business in Bruges. The Vatican, aiming to reinforce its universal authority, would summon the best artists from multiple regions to Rome, creating a temporary summit where ideas were exchanged as rapidly as paint was mixed. In this system, art was never a solitary statement. A stained glass window in Canterbury might echo the color schemes of a manuscript illuminated in Paris, because the same pattern book had passed through both workshops. A statue of a saint in Prague might share the gentle drapery of one in Bamberg, carved by the same itinerant sculptor's hand. This constant, funded movement turned the visual landscape of Europe into a coherent, if varied, dialogue. The soaring vaults of a distant cathedral and the delicate brushstrokes of a private devotional panel were all part of the same sprawling conversation, whispered from patron to artist and carried on the road from one great commission to the next, proving that beauty, too, was a form of high-value information that traveled the fastest routes money could buy. The true legacy of these 25 pathways is not found in any single ledger or ledger, but in the mind of Europe itself. Having traced the golden threads of amber, the salt-stained trails, the pilgrim roads and financial wires, a stunning composite image emerges. The medieval continent was not a patchwork of dark, isolated manners, but a dynamic, humming circuit board. These ancient information highways wired it together, creating a shared technological toolkit available from Ireland to the Urals. A master mason's knowledge of the flying buttress, a Venetian banker's bill of exchange, a Hanseatic merchant's standard for barrel staves, these were not local secrets, but open-source code circulating on a continental network. This connectivity built a vast, decentralized reservoir of knowledge. The medical texts of Persia, the agricultural methods of a Flemish monastery, the astronomical charts of Samarkand, and the legal precedents of Roman law all flowed into this common pool, accessible to anyone with the means or curiosity to tap the stream. The result was a profound economic interdependence. The wool of English sheep clothed Florentine bankers, the silver of German mines minted coins for Arab sultans, and the furs of Siberian trappers lined the robes of Byzantine emperors. No kingdom, no matter how powerful, was an island. This deep interconnection became the essential precondition for the explosions to come. The commercial revolution, with its sophisticated credit instruments and global joint stock companies, was not invented in a vacuum. It was the logical outcome of centuries of financial data flowing along the routes between the Champagne fairs, Lombard banking houses, and Hanseatic counting rooms. Similarly, the later scientific revolution was seeded by this medieval internet. The recovered works of Aristotle and the innovations of Islamic mathematicians, carried on parchment and paper along trade routes, provided the very tools of rational inquiry. The logic, the mathematics, the appetite for systematic observation that would later question the cosmos. This constant exchange, of course, bred friction as often as fellowship. Competition over trade routes sparked wars, rival merchant cities clashed in bloody naval battles, and religious differences often hardened along commercial frontiers. Yet, even conflict accelerated change. As the arms trade disseminated military technology, and the struggle for commercial advantage drove innovation in shipbuilding, navigation, and fortification. The undeniable outcome was an unprecedented acceleration in the pace of cultural and technological change. A new idea, whether a plow design or a philosophical concept, no longer had to be rediscovered independently in every isolated valley. It could travel, adapt, and improve, moving at the speed of a merchant caravan or a sailing cog. These networks proved, on a continental scale, a fundamental truth of human history. While castles and cathedrals stand as monuments to power and faith, the real engine of civilization has always been quieter, running on the simple, relentless exchange of ideas between curious, connected people. From the sun-baked trails of the Sahara to the misty rivers of the Viking world, we have walked the 25 ancient trade networks that served as Europe's first information highways. Their story is not one of simple commerce, but of a continent whispering to itself across vast distances, sharing the very codes of civilization. These routes remind us with profound clarity that connection has always been the true engine of human progress. They moved spices and silk, yes, but more importantly, they transmitted the intangible cargo that reshapes worlds, the blueprint for a cathedral, the logic of a legal code, the melody of a new faith, the digits of a revolutionary numeral. This was a medieval internet, a living system where news traveled at the speed of a horse, innovation spread with the footsteps of a pilgrim, and financial data flowed in the elegant script of a bill of exchange. As we navigate our own dizzying digital age with its instant global signals, understanding these ancient analog networks offers a grounding lesson. The medium changes from parchment scrolls to fiber optic cables, from merchant caravans to data packets. But the core human drive remains beautifully, stubbornly constant: the need to connect, to share what we know, and to learn from those beyond our immediate horizon. This exploration invites you to look at the landscape of history with new eyes, to see the hidden connections etched into the earth itself. Which of these information highways captures your imagination the most? Was it the golden lure of the Amber Road, the corporate might of the Hanseatic League, or the scholarly river that flowed from Timbuktu? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to journey with us as we continue to unravel the countless threads of our shared past.